SSH, or the Secure Shell, is a mainstay for communicating with remote devices and makes it easy and secure to log into and remotely control a computer like a Raspberry Pi. Today, we'll show you how you can use this on any computer with a browser when we show you the Secure Shell extension on this episode of Cyber Weapons Lab. SSH, or the Secure Shell, is a way of communicating with a remote device over a network, like a Raspberry Pi or a computer that's maybe at home. Now, you can do this over a local network or over a remote one in order to control a computer that you don't have physical access to. And when it comes to a computer that doesn't have a screen like a Raspberry Pi, this can be a lifesaver if you don't have the necessary hardware available. Now, SSH can sound a little bit intimidating, but you don't even need to get into a terminal window in order to use it. In fact, some computers like Windows might not be able to do SSH from the terminal at all, and instead would need to download a third-party tool like PuTTY. Now today we'll show you how you can avoid all this on any computer that has access to a browser window by using Chrome to download the Secure Shell extension. Now what this does is implements the Secure Shell protocol within the browser, allowing you to connect to any device either on a local network or on a far-flung network in order to control it remotely via your browser window. Now, in order to do this, you'll only need to have Chrome installed, so this is a pretty easy one that everyone can participate in. Once you have Google Chrome, then we can begin. Now, before we get started attempting to connect to something with SSH, we'll need to actually find it on the network. Now, the two components of an SSH command are going to be the account we want to log into on the network, aka the administrator account or root or something like that, and then the IP address that the device we're looking to log into resides on the network or remotely. Now, to find a device on the network that has SSH, we can run a simple nmap scan, and I'll show you what we can do in order to locate any devices using port 22 as the default SSH port. Now first we'll type sudo nmap and then tacp, and 22 is going to be the default port that SSH runs on unless you select a different one. Now here we're going to assume that everything is running on port 22, and then we'll use the network range for this network, which in this case is 192.168.0.24. If you want to find the network range on your network, you can take the IP address and just run it in ipcalc, which will calculate the subnet for you, including calculating this nice little range here. So as soon as I run this, then I should be able to see if there's any devices on the network which say they have a port 22 open, telling us that that's one that we might be able to log into with SSH. Now here we are, we can see there is a actual port 22 open on 192.168.0.32, so this is what we'll be using today as our demonstration device to log into. Now initially there's not much I can really do on just a Google Chrome window, but what we can start with is the Secure Shell extension, which is available in the Google Web Store. Now when we add this to Chrome, it'll go ahead and ask us if we want to add the extension, and we can see it can display notifications, read your accessibility settings, and read and modify data you copy and paste. So we'll go ahead and add the extension, and then once we add that, it should be relatively simple to log into devices on the network. Now we can go ahead and be more specific with this, and we can even go ahead and add something like a SSH key, enabling us to use slightly more powerful security on this and make it so we could even maybe remotely revoke that key in the event we want to disable somebody from breaking into our connection. Now I'm gonna go ahead and close out here, and we see it's been loaded. So let's test it out and type SSH and then tour at 192.168.0.32. So we're typing this in like it's a website. Let's see what happens when we run it. Here we go. So we seem to get a shell, which is pretty cool to have available in the browser. And it's going to ask us the question about the authenticity of the host, and we'll need to accept this key if we want to connect. Now, if this changes later, then it won't allow us to actually interact with this. So make sure that this is actually the device that you want to connect to before connecting to it and choosing to trust this key. In this case, I'll type yes. And now I'll get to the part where I need to supply the password and prove that I have permission to connect to this host. So I'll go ahead and type the password. And here we go. We are actually logged into this Ubuntu device, and now we can go ahead and do whatever we want. We can type ls, we can reboot it. All that is now available to us in this cool connection. So that's pretty interesting, but what else can we do with SSH? So if I open a new window and then type SSH, I can go ahead and see, I can hit the Secure Shell app, and there's a couple different suggestions for how to do this. Now, if I want to type C for choose another connection, I get this new connection window, and I'm able to enter in all the information bit by bit and kind of be more specific about it if something's changed. Now, an example of this might be if we're using a port other than 22 in order to avoid, scans like the one I just did, basically. Somebody who wants to hide their connection might move it over to a random other port, maybe port 81 or port 222, really whatever they want to do. They can move it to a different port, and it would be a little bit harder to find on a typical scan. But here we can select a different port and type in, let's say 222, and we can even go through and save different identities or add arguments to the SSH command in order to do other things other than just simply creating a direct connection. Now I can also click on the options, and we can do other things like set up a profile, change our appearance, and manage the app a little bit more thoroughly. But in general, this should be enough to execute whatever command we want on our system. Now, just as an example, I'm going to run a quick command here and show what happens if we do a sudo reboot. We should be able to reboot the system remotely, and there we go. We get kicked out because we have executed a command on a remote device from a simple Chrome browser. Now, this extension is really useful, and of course, like I said, it can also be used for any devices, let's say you discover on Shodan. But it's important to note that while it is a secure shell, that doesn't mean that people can't see what you're doing, especially if you're attempting to connect from your IP address to their box remotely. Before you go about connecting to something that you don't know what it is, consider very carefully that SSH honeypots are extremely popular. So don't let that be a way to link your IP address to a honeypot for some sort of person looking out for people breaking into computers they're not supposed to. While SSH is a secure and easy way to connect to remote devices, you might run into a couple roadblocks early on. One really common problem I used to run into is when I had to reset a Raspberry Pi or another computer that was being problematic, and then when I tried to connect to it via SSH, I got a prompt telling me that it couldn't because it was worried about a man in the middle or some other sketchy thing going on. Now, this is because the SSH session key is stored in a host file, and in order to move on, you need to open it in Nano or another text editor and delete the line including the device that you have reset or otherwise modified. Now, this is to prevent another device from sneaking in and pretending to be the one you've connected with before, but it can be pretty confusing and annoying to a beginner who just wants to connect to the Raspberry Pi that they've reset. That's all we have for this episode of Cyber Weapons Lab. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you have any thoughts or feedback on the show, send me a message on Twitter, because I'd love to hear from you. We'll see you next time.